A woman finds her stolen car in a lake and screams loudly when she sees what's inside. Nobody understood how Margaret's car ended up in this lake in the middle of the forest, but it soon became clear that whoever threw it didn't want it to be found again. The whole situation was shrouded in mystery until the trunk of the car was opened. Then suddenly it became clear to everyone what had happened. Margaret felt as if her legs were shaky as her car was being pulled out of the lake. The car was disappeared for almost 2 months. She asked herself every day, where the hell could it be? In the meantime, Margaret would soon discover the disturbing truth when she started looking around the car. When the police opened the trunk of the car and Margaret saw what was inside, she nearly fell to her knees as police jumped back in shock. The officers couldn't believe what they were seeing, but suddenly it all started to make sense. Tears are starting to trickle down Margaret's cheeks as all attention quickly turns to her. But who stole Margaret's car? How did it end up in the lake? And what did they find in the trunk? It was a typical Monday morning when Margaret received an unexpected call from the police. They announced to her that they had found her stolen car near the forest lake. The truth is, she didn't expect to ever see her car again. It was 2 whole months without any news. She felt happy and relieved because at that moment she couldn't afford to buy a new one. The day these people stole her car was difficult for her. She was at her house in the living room watching TV. This was really a day when everything was going well for her. Until that moment, suddenly she saw her car lights come on. She couldn't do anything at this point. She just screamed at the top of her lungs, but no one heard her. Before she even left, the car had already accelerated. Margaret had no idea how they opened her car or what exactly happened. Her screams woke her husband, who had already gone to bed and was sleeping. They decided that the best idea for now was to call the police and report what had happened. The next day at the police station, they reported the theft of her car, and the police reported that this was something that had apparently happened very recently. Margaret hoped this meant that they would know how to help her. But that wasn't the truth. When it actually looked like they weren't able to do much. Almost none of the cars stolen in this way had been recovered yet, so the odds of finding Margaret's car weren't good at all. They still had no idea who these people are or why they stole cars all the time. It wasn't a simple case for the police, but they wanted to do anything to help Margaret find her car. After many days of trying to find a clue, the police realized that none of the cars had been seen in the area. So they speculated that they might be transporting the cars out of state or even out of the country. Another big problem was that they also hadn't appeared on any cameras filming the road leading out of town. They concluded that it could be very possible that they would choose to transport these cars in huge trucks or something. But the part that didn't make sense to them was that the stolen cars weren't especially valuable. So using a secret transport like this can cost a lot more than the car itself. The police were shocked by the case, but promised to add the details of Margaret's car to the list with the other stolen cars so they'd keep an eye on it. At this point, Margaret still had a little hope, but as the days went by, her hopes slowly faded. She was expecting a call every day, but the phone didn't ring. The days became weeks and the weeks became months. It's been 2 months since Margaret hasn't heard anything about her car. Suddenly one morning, Margaret finally got a call about her car. She'd really forgotten about it at this point and was stunned when she picked up the phone. When she picked up the phone, she heard a very familiar voice. The person who called was an old friend of hers. She hadn't spoken to him in years. The biggest surprise was that he called her about her missing car. She felt very relieved and happy because she believed that she'd never find her car again. Apparently, she'd seen the post about the stolen car that Margaret had posted on Facebook. The photo stayed in his mind for months, and he thought about it quite often. One day, while taking a daily walk, he actually saw the car. He was very excited about it, so he decided to call her as soon as possible. For the first few minutes, she was ecstatic that her car had been found and wanted to go get it right away. But her friend had bad news for Margaret. The car wasn't as accessible as Margaret thought at first. The friend described to her where exactly he had found the missing car, and Margaret began to lose hope again. He explained to Margaret that the car was not in a state where she could come get it. The man found the car in the middle of the lake, located in the local woods. At first, he couldn't recognize the car, but after a few minutes, he realized that the car was the same as Margaret's missing car. They both had a lot of questions about how the car ended up in the lake. This area was not easily accessible as there were no roads or anything leaving there. The big question was, why did the car stop at this point? Because these people stole the car and then abandoned it in the middle of the lake. Margaret's heart sank when she learned her car was in the lake. She had already been compensated a little by the insurance company, so there wasn't even a good reason for her to go get her car. After a while, she thought this might be a useful clue to the police investigation. Margaret knew this case was very important to the police, and they were still working on it. She believed this might be the clue they needed. So Margaret and now her friend were very curious about this whole ordeal. So she made the decision to call the police station and inform the officers about what her friend had found out. When she called the police, they told her that they'd come get her right away and find the car. The friend who had called Margaret would also be there. The policemen knew that this was the only chance to detect this whole mystery of missing cars. As they already knew, this area was not easily accessible. Police cars were unable to reach the lake, so they had to go off the road largely and through narrow passages between the trees. It wasn't easy to get to the lake, but they had to find out what exactly had happened to this car. The police were baffled as to how someone managed to get the car into the middle of the lake. So they began to doubt whether Margaret's friend told the truth about what he had thought that day. Their main question was, why did they steal a car and then drag it into the middle of the lake? The cops had a fair notion why this car ended up in the lake. The most plausible conclusion was that the car thief didn't want it found. Now they just have to get to the lake and get the car. They finally reached the lake. After 2 hours of trying, they met Margaret's pal and his dog. They found the automobile in the water too, so now they just have to go to the car. That day they were quite close to solving the case. Margaret and the cops were still waiting. A tow vehicle arrived 15 minutes later, but it too struggled to negotiate the train. Nobody knew the real reason. Even if they could only see the car's roof above the water, Margaret knew that it was her automobile. She waited impatiently for the shriek. She almost dived into the river to see if her automobile was still there. Officers halted her. One of the officers had a wetsuit on. Someone had to get into the water to start the truck, but he was already there to look at the car. The water was icy. Margaret was lucky she didn't have to go inside. He couldn't open anything to let additional water into the car, but he could inspect the outside, which was scuffed. Not too cautiously, the driver sped through the trees. There was a reason he had to rush. They hadn't observed any damaged trees on their approach there, so they assumed it was driven. Cautiously, they searched the immediate area, but found nothing. Maybe he took a different route. The officer was still on the scene when he noticed another trail with black ink traces or scratches on the trees. It was previously there. Therefore, this track goes deeper. It was absurd wondering where the car came from. When the tow truck arrived, the automobile was out of the water. Maybe that'll help them. The truth would astonish the cop in the water, hooked the winch to the back of the car, and slowly drew it to shore. The car was nearly submerged. She was tense. Margaret sensed her pulse. She hoped nothing was damaged inside the car. Knowing it was probably totaled, she anticipated to locate her own stuff, but they found something else. When the car eventually reached dry land, it was a great surprise not to be entirely submerged. Sure, a lot had happened, but the seats were still dry. Maybe the thief was still around. The automobile couldn't stay in the water, so the cops dusted off fingerprints in hopes of catching the thief. Margaret became more nervous. What happened? Well, one police inspected the car's interior. The other tried to open the trunk, and Margaret's key no longer worked. Perhaps due to the car's damage, a cop took out his crowbar. Using a crowbar, he was able to fully open the trunk. After several attempts, Margaret was the first person to notice its unusual content. Her mouth opened and she kneeled. What did she see? The police immediately looked at Margaret, who was on her knees crying at this point, trying to get confirmation that she was not responsible for this. When she managed to give the information, the officer immediately called for backup. Margaret wasn't feeling well. The policeman put on his gloves before he dared touch anything in the trunk of the car. And it wasn't until he laid it all down that he got an idea of the true scale of what they found. Even the officers were very surprised by what they found. Trying to calm Margaret down, in the trunk were bags full of water-damaged money and substances that would likely have been sold to earn that kind of money.